How Not to Sail, sponsored by Latitudes and Attitudes. They ruined my life, so why not let them ruin yours today at latsats.com.
Well, that's unfortunate. Seems my ad is not in this issue of Cruising Outpost. That was kind of my whole release strategy.
When we last spoke, I'd just made an unfortunate discovery. Kind of a showstopper, really. Just to recap, I've now sailed over 300 miles, alone, from St. Pete to Miami, dodging crab pots, repeatedly fixing my cutlass bearing, and doing the usual stupid things. Why did I do this? Well, aside from the fact that I love being out on the water. Ever since I bought my sailboat, I've had this idea to write a book called How Not to Sail, which, like many folks, I quickly became an expert at. Then I decided to do a podcast to go along with it.
Remind me why you're doing this again?
Because otherwise there's no story. And to launch the podcast, I figured I'd sail around to Miami to the boat show where my sponsor, Cruising Outpost, will be throwing a big party. I'll meet the Admiral in Miami in time for Valentine's Day, and I've printed up some postcards for us to hand out that I think are pretty slick. But the whole linchpin of the plan is the ad that's due to come out in the next issue of Cruising Outpost magazine. It goes out quarterly to about 70,000 people. And today, the day of the big Cruising Outpost and pirate radio party at the boat show, I got a look at an advance copy of the next Cruising Outpost, and it's not there. My ad is nowhere to be found in the magazine. Yeah, kind of a bummer. Maybe I should have had a little more robust plan. But I really don't have time to process all this because I still have work I've committed to do.
So I'm standing in the side aisle of Tent A at the Miami Boat Show with my laptop and interface sitting on a little concrete strip next to a spare power outlet, trying to make a pirate radio show happen.
As you may remember from episodes 4 and 8 and, well, I forget where all, I've been doing a gig on pirate radio, the Captain Billy Shine Show. The promos were a hoot. Captain Billy Shine here with the mailbag, where we answer your questions about all things nautical. And stuff about boats, too. We're coming to you today live from the Dixie Tavern in Smyrna, just west of the Chattahoochee. The food's not as good as Pete's Pig Jig, but they got live music every so often. Anyway, today's question comes from Dennis in Gulfport, who says, "Hey, Captain Billy, I was just wondering, how'd you come to name your boat Windbreaker?" Well, Dennis, that's a good question. A lot of folks seem to name their vessel by combining a word that has to do with nature with a word that has to do with performing some activity, like moon dancer. So you might think that old Captain Billy came up with Windbreaker the same way, but that's not exactly how it happened in this case. You see, the same day I bought Windbreaker, me and my buddy were just leaving all-you-can-eat burrito night at Los Huevos, feeling good and full, when all of a sudden, it hit me like a thunderclap. I'd left my jacket at Los Huevos. Glad I could help, Dennis. And remember, for more nautical advice from me, Captain Billy Shine, catch me on Saturdays 1 to 6 right here for the Captain Billy Shine Show. Now, just to be clear, I'm not currently on pirate radio, but I highly encourage you to check them out if you like some of that there trop rock. That's pirate with a Y. Anyway, I finished pre-producing a short Captain Billy show to lead into the live broadcast of the Cruising Outpost and Pirate Radio Cruisers Party. Then I went to find Bob Bitchin. Now, if you've seen Bob or know anything about him, it's not like I'm going to give him a hard time. But I wouldn't anyway. Ever since our first emails through the Skype interview that I'm planning to use as my first podcast episode but need to finish working on, I feel like Bob has been looking after me. And of course he didn't intentionally leave my ad out of the next issue of Cruising Outpost, which, as it turns out, will be the last issue of Cruising Outpost.
Okay, we're going to give away some stuff. Because Eric needs to pee.
Because at the cruisers party that evening, we get some interesting news from Bob. After having to change the name of the magazine Latitudes and Attitudes to Cruising Outpost for a few years, Bob announces he has the go-ahead to publish again as Latitudes and Attitudes. In the back of my mind, I wonder if he's throttled somebody with his bare hands. But at least now the commercial I've been running for 10 episodes or so will make much more sense.
Smooth seas and blue skies.
Bob had a problem. You see, Bob had a magazine. And then Bob ran into some trouble and lost his magazine, Latitudes and Attitudes. But guess what? America's #1 boating lifestyle magazine is back again as Latitudes and Attitudes. Check it out today at latsats.com.
Yeah, so that's pretty much the story. The magazine that I got into cruising with, Latitudes and Attitudes, transformed into Cruising Outpost after Bob Bitchin got screwed over by a very unscrupulous fellow who shut down their offices and moved to South America. Or something like that. But now they're back as Latitudes and Attitudes, and we are super happy about that. So that's good news for them. But meanwhile, I got bad news. The whole rug I built my little house of cards on has just been yanked the out from under me. So what to do? Well, I guess I have two choices. Give up, or keep plowing blindly forward. And if you know me at all by now, I think you know which I'm gonna pick. The postcards I have printed up say I have a podcast coming in 2 weeks. And I'm gonna stick with that. Bob promises to make sure my ad isn't overlooked in the next issue, so although my ad isn't in the final issue of Cruising Outpost, hopefully it'll be in the first issue of the new Latitudes and Attitudes. So I guess I'll just make my way back around South Florida, and hopefully I'll meet some interesting folks along the way, or do something entertaining, and hopefully I can get that interview with the owner of Cabbage Key on the way back. Heck, maybe I can count on my awesome listeners to help me out. Maybe when this episode airs and you find out what a colossal up my release strategy has become, you'll come to my rescue. Maybe right now I can count on you to press pause and leave a nice 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever you're listening on. Or maybe you can find a friend and literally drag them kicking and screaming to subscribe to the podcast. Or both. Nah, it'll never work. Anyway, here I am with the Admiral in Miami, and after dragging her around to the boat show twice, and her dragging me to South Beach, and my stupendous non-triumph with my magazine ad, we probably need to go sailing. I met Larry and Tommy from the very cool nonprofit Shake a Leg Miami, who told me we could probably sail into a waterfront eatery in Coconut Grove, just a few miles south of the marina. So on Sunday, while the Lats and Ats folks were wrapping up, I took the Admiral for a day sail on her last day in Miami. The entrance to Coconut Grove was pretty shallow, and so it was that on this particular Sunday I learned a new technique, how not to go ashore in the dinghy. The first step is to leave the dinghy motor back in Gulfport because you don't figure you'll need it. Then you need to underestimate the current and how far from shore you really are. I mean, how bad could rowing 3/4 of a mile really be? Finally, make sure you run aground at least once before dropping the hook and getting into the dink. It apparently helps scare off any catamarans that were anchored too close to where you wanted to be. So, having effected all these steps, I set out with the Admiral, rowing toward Coconut Grove. It wasn't long before I discovered my error. We didn't seem to be closing very fast with the shore, even with the current. We came abreast of a little key in the entrance channel, but the shore looked as distant as ever. After maybe a 1/4 mile, I informed the Admiral that we would not be going ashore, at least not until we got back to the marina. And with that, I turned us around as gracefully as a pelican with hemorrhoids and began rowing back toward Jacie Sails. Which took a while. You may be surprised to hear this, but rowing back against the current is even harder than rowing with the current. Praise the Lord, past the turnip greens.
You did it.
Yay. Now we're going to get back on and use the real boat. So we did get back on the real boat and beat it back to the marina where we did have a nice dinner ashore. Tanya left the next day to fly back to Atlanta, and I visited with my Miami family and provisioned for the trip back around Florida in my usual way, calling Shipt to bring groceries to the marina. Because as I've been learning a lot recently, there's no reason to row against the current if you don't have to. Sometimes you gotta go with the current and take what it gives you. I've got postcards that say I have a podcast coming out in 2 weeks. I have an interview with Bob Bitchin that I recorded on Skype. I have enough fuel to get back down to Marathon if the winds help me out. And I still have most of the blissful ignorance that I started the trip with. What could possibly go wrong? So, I was kidding a little this episode about leaving me a nice 5-star review and maybe turning on a friend to the podcast, but I really wouldn't be mad a bit if you did. After all, you can see that my so-called release strategy needs your help. So once you finish your beer, please take a minute to leave a nice 5-star review on iTunes or Spotify or whatever you're listening on. And if you're not 5-star impressed, well, just have another beer instead. I'll also leave some sexy links in the show notes in case you feel inclined to share How Not to Sail with your friends on Facebook, Twitter, or what have you. You can always find the show notes for each episode at hownottosail.com/the episode number. So in this case, hownottosail.com/12. Big thanks to Captain McPherson, Kira Bird, SVT Glatch, Michael the Sound Guy, and GFJKKVGJX for the most recent 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts. If you've left me a review, don't be shy about letting me know. Finally, don't miss my upcoming interview with Nathan and Vivian from Ocean Passages on the YouTube channel at youtube.com/hownottosail. Have a great time, and I'll see you next time on
How Not to Sail. Screwing up is part of cruising. Let me show you how.
Praise the Lord, past the turnip greens.
You did it.